Kaizer Chiefs are out of the League Cup, and I blame the coaches for so many reasons, and we'll go through all of the reasons. For starters, their starting lineup, I did not complain because they played Untuari, they kept Tumayo as a striker. I thought they were going to play Usilva, but Silva is dropped altogether, not even on the bench. You get me? He was not even on the bench, mate. I don't get that. Now, if he's injured, I will have my hands in the air and say, okay, I'm wrong. But I don't remember. You can tell me on the comments if Silva is injured. They bring on Tashik Morris on the bench. No. This is not about his penalty. We're going to talk about the penalty later on. They bring him on to sit on the bench, right? Because I can even think, even if it wasn't him who was sitting on the bench, I could think of other players. Iko Daro, they are saying he's fine now. It's just that maybe he's not match fit, right? But why not have him sit on the bench and maybe play him in the last 10, 15 minutes? That doesn't happen. Silva is also not there. Okay, fine, we move. Where was Duba today? On the bench. Because now we're not talking about the starting 11. We're talking about thinking, okay, if this Mayo thing doesn't work, who comes on for him? Dupreez as a target man. What if Stellies are sitting back? And in fact, there was a point where Stellies was sitting back, or was the point where we're trying to get the ball into the area, but there is no target man. Umayo is more of an inside forward, like a right winger or right forward, not a striker. For me, what I see him, even the shot that he took, where was he coming from? He was coming from the left-hand side, cut in, takes a shot, good save by the keeper. Okay, fine, I sequel up. Let's talk about the main thing. Let me take you back to the game against Kabuskop. On that game, there was an incident whereby Kaizer and Khalil were talking to Aseka Mako. They were shouting at him for not tracking back. And then he was chatting back. Imagine that. And I said to you, this is a problem. It seems like these players are not respecting the coaches, because who talks back or chats back to their coaches like that in a match? And what happened in the following game? By the way, that game, Marco played the entire game, but then in the following game was mysteriously injured. Right? Injured. And then in that game against Kabuskop, I also talked about the fact that players seemed on edge. They were shouting at each other and doing all of those things. And I said there's a problem in that technical area, or in the dressing room, right? Because I said to you, that technical area, that technical room, that coaching thingy needs a coach. And I did not say they must fire them. I remember saying this to you because I know some people will say I have an Abi agenda, will say, Vele, you didn't like them. I said, if you have Kaizer and Khalil as co-coaches, there is still that thing of not knowing who is in charge. I said, if you are going to keep Kaizer and Khalil, because the performances that they put out up to that far were good enough, even though the matches were not being won, but they were good enough, the performances. I was like, decide that one of them must be a coach, the other must be an assistant. Because if you do not have a head coach, that means a decision has to be discussed for 5 minutes before a decision is made. Kaizer might say, let's take off Mdu now. Someone will say, give him 5 more minutes. Then they discuss. Remember, there is also Mzuki there. All of them are coaches. Mzuki is a goalkeeper coach. But why am I bringing him up right now? It's because today, Mzuki made a decision that Bruce Bvuma should come on for Fiacre. Bruce Bvuma, whose penalty record is 0 saves in the last 9 that he has faced. Untuar, on the other hand, has saved some penalties in recent matches for his home team, which is EE Rwanda. Right? So you are telling me that you are going to take that player off. And that player looking at that, he's like, I'm not going to go off. You're not going to take me off. He refuses. And by the way, it's not just Ntwari who refused to be taken off. Umthetho was also refusing to be taken off. It took for like 10 to 15 seconds. You know when a player looks over and is like, I'm being taken off, and then they slowly walk towards... No, that wasn't the case. He was literally, he looked and then he just looked away and then he wasn't looking at them anymore because he didn't want to go off. He was refusing, but he ended up going off. But the fact that players have to question coaches like that, then must tell you, between Marco arguing with them, and now today, 2 players refusing to go off. That is a big problem. It's a huge problem about leadership. I'm not talking about coaching here. I'm talking about leadership. Right? But let's move on to another one. Right? If you look at the players who took penalties for Chiefs, 4 out of 5 of them were subs, right? The 2 players who took penalties, 4 of the 6 players who took penalties were the subs, right? Were the subs. The only 2 players who took penalties who started the game were Solomons and Cross. Okay, fine. Cross takes a penalty, scores. I think in the game against Kabuskop also scored. Gaston Sirino scored. Thabo Cele scored. Aiden McCarthy scored. He scored against Kabuskop. In fact, the other players, they took penalties against Kabuskop. Solomons, I think, I forgot about Kabuskop. Remind me if he took it or not. I think it was Frosla who took it because Solomons had gone off. My question is, why did they choose Tashrick Morris to take a penalty? I know that penalties are decided before the game because the coaches see them do penalties at training. But then if you are going to make a player take a penalty, especially if they haven't played the entire season, especially if they haven't scored a penalty in the previous case, because Aiden McCarthy might have come late just as Morris also came late. But Aiden McCarthy did score against Kabuskop. Aiden McCarthy had been scoring penalties for the DDC team. We know he takes penalties for the Chiefs. I think even with Toyota Cup, he took a penalty, he scored. We know this, like recently in Kabuskop, right? But Tashrick Morris, right? Morris had not taken a penalty for the Chiefs against Kabuskop. Morris had not played a single match, a single minute for the Chiefs since the season started. And today, you bring him on, literally in the dying minutes of the game. You bring him on then. That's when you bring him on. And then when you bring him on, what is your decision? Your decision is that he's going to take a penalty. A decisive penalty. Like there is Ashley Dupreez, right? Who misses a lot of 1v1s, but he has played more matches. He has scored a goal. He has some confidence behind him. Could have taken the penalty. I am not blaming Morris. Just so we are clear. I'm not blaming Morris. I'm blaming the decision to bring on a player who hasn't played the entire season to come in and take a penalty. I've told you this. Sereno missed a penalty 2 games ago, 3 games ago. I didn't blame him. Lilepo missed a penalty. I didn't blame him. I will blame the fact that decisions have to be taken. I think around I'm looking at this, around the 80th minute, it was exactly 80 minutes, 30 seconds. Ulilepo was about to take a free kick. He was told by the coaches to leave the free kick. He looked at them across, was like, you see that he's not happy. Ucele ended up taking that free kick. Why are players deciding to make decisions? I get pissed off. I think there was one time where one of my players decided to take a free kick. I have a designated free kick taker. That was disrespectful to me. And you know what I do to that player? I bench him because so if you have a player who does that now, I shouted at him because the game was already going on. But the point is, you cannot have things just changing, happening out of nowhere as a coach, as a leader. So, the coach coming in the interview saying, Ntuari felt confident, so we let him play. You didn't let him play. He just wasn't going to go out. And you were done making subs. So, am I blaming the coaching? For not winning the match in 90 minutes, yes, because the subs were too late. Guys, the subs were late. Let me give you something that happened. On the 75th minute and 30 seconds, the broadcaster showed us fans doing this. Time for subs. At the time, Chiefs had only made 1 sub. On the 76th minute, right on the dot, guess who was coming on? Ashley Dupreez. So for 2 games in a row, these coaches have listened to fans telling them to make subs. I am not saying the subs should have been ignored, but I'm saying the timing of the subs is what gets me. Because what message are you sending to the fans? You are telling fans that whenever you guys are complaining about subs, we will make the subs. But why were fans complaining about the subs? Because the game did not look like it was going to a point where Chiefs were going to score a goal. Yet subs were not being made. Why had they not decided to make subs earlier? Because they have to discuss it among themselves. There is no head coach. It's co-coaches, equal power, which leads to indecision. Because when Nabi was around, I'm going to bring this up. When Nabi was around, if a sub was going to be made, it was going to be made. They can discuss. But there's a final saying, forget Nabi. Doesn't have to be Nabi. It can be Kaizer, it can be Khalil. Either one of them, if Chiefs decides to stick with them, they cannot keep them as co-coaches. Co-coaches leads to this thing of pride of the two people. One wants his ideas to go across. The other one wants his idea to go across. You can't overrule me because we have the same position. We saw this at Sundowns. They did win a cup double, but eventually you started seeing cracks. That is why the co-coaching thing never works. Because it's two people, and one thing about coaches that I know, coaches are just stubborn. Coaches are stubborn. If you look at Pirates, for example, Uwad, when he came in, he was stubborn to make changes immediately because he thought that was going to work for him. It didn't work. He ended up coming down to earth because he saw that he was going to get fired. So he changed his attitude. Same thing at Sundowns. When they were there, they wanted to play a certain type of way, but his way of scoring a lot of goals was also conceding a lot of goals. That is why in Africa he was in a situation where he wasn't ahead because he couldn't score more goals, but he was still conceding. So he was still conceding a lot of, sending a lot of players up front, leaving a hole at the back. Thus they will concede. But here in PSL, he was going forward, scoring more goals, but he was conceding fewer goals because teams were scared of them. That got him fired. Like we see about Pep doing something, he's going to play like this even if it doesn't work. That's just how coaches work. They are stubborn. Take two, make them of the same position. It's never going to work. So I blame the coaches, but I also blame the management. What did you guys think? Do let me know down in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, remember, equals.